Okay, so a quick question from Adam, who asks, is it correct that stimulus like quantitative easing is positive for a currency in the short term and negative in the long term? So generally speaking, quantitative easing is negative for a currency. The reason for this is because quantitative easing is increasing the supply of that currency. And if you're increasing its supply, then you are decreasing its value. So a good example to show the influence of quantitative easing is just with the dollar index, because we've seen multiple QE programs from the Fed over the years. And you can see on the chart, we have simply mapped out its QE1, QE2, and QE3 programs. So we can see, starting off with QE1, following its announcement, that the dollar index did then go on to, over the following months, did go on to weaken. Then QE1 came to an end. We saw a bit of strength go through the dollar. We then had some hints from the Fed that they would be beginning QE2, and then we actually had the start of QE2. And we can see throughout that period, the dollar index once again initially declined, and then we saw a bit of a recovery into the end of QE2. Then we had the beginning of QE3, but you'll notice then what we actually see is we saw the Fed back in December 2013 announce that they were going to begin tapering their QE programs. And you'll notice that from that point on, we actually saw quite a bit of strength go through the dollar index. So this strength was in part because the Fed were beginning to taper QE, but at the same time, we also had growing speculation and the eventual announcement in March 2015 that the ECB would be introducing quantitative easing. So what we had is we had the Fed concluding their QE programs, and we had the ECB just beginning to begin their QE programs. And you'll notice we saw very similar moves in the euro dollar. Just from early 2014, when we started to see speculation, and then eventually to the implementation of quantitative easing in March. So of course, we know that the market prices things in advance depending on expectations. So this weakness in euro dollar was largely a result of our expectation for the ECB to implement QE, and it was coincidentally at the same time when the Fed were beginning to conclude and taper their QE programs. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight into the effect of quantitative easing on currencies. Any further questions, feel free to type them in the question box just below.